You are not meant to think clearly, because if you did, even for a fleeting 10 seconds, you would walk away from everything that has been silently eroding your soul. You would no longer beg for inclusion at tables where you are not welcome. You would cease explaining yourself to those who revel in misunderstanding you. You would stop trading your inner peace for fleeting praise or fracturing your mind to fit a version of yourself that pleases others. You would see the trap for what it is, an emotional labyrinth designed to keep you distracted, obedient, and predictable. And in that moment of quiet realization, your mind growing still and sharp, you would become dangerous. For clarity is a fire that burns through manipulation. It incinerates the masks of false urgency, feigned loyalty, and performative love. So ask yourself, how many of your decisions are truly your own? How many are inherited, demanded, or simply expected? This isn't about thinking more, it's about thinking clean. This is the essence of Stoicism, not cold detachment, but disciplined truth. It is the art of stripping away illusion until your thoughts belong to you again. If you are tired of living in reaction, of being ruled by noise, then let this be a quiet act of rebellion. A signal to your future self that you chose clarity over chaos, discipline over distraction, and a mind that no one else can silently control. Most people believe they are thinking, when in truth, they are merely reacting. The difference is as subtle as it is profound. A true thought is intentional. It is built, shaped, examined, and owned. But a reaction is a flash in the dark, automatic, instinctive, and almost always invisible. It wears the mask of thought, but beneath, it is only an emotional echo. Someone raises their voice, and you are suddenly cloaked in defensiveness. A choice appears. The cold grip of anxiety tightens, and so you retreat, telling yourself you are being strategic. But trace it back. That was not a decision. It was a triggered response, a flare of emotion pretending to be insight. We live in a world that rewards speed, not depth, and in its relentless urgency, there is no room for the sacred pause. But clarity cannot be rushed. It cannot exist in chaos. It demands that we step back and ask, from where did this feeling arise? What am I assuming to be true? Most will never ask these questions. They never interrogate the voice in their heads, assuming it to be their own. But so often it is not. It is the echo of a parent they sought to please, a crowd they learned to fear, a belief absorbed without consent. And so, unknowingly, the mind becomes a stage for everyone else's story, a theater where every role is played, except your own. The Stoics taught that emotion is not the problem is unexamined emotion. As Epictetus said, it is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Within that sentence lies a brutal kind of freedom. For if your judgment creates your suffering, your clarity can unmake it. But first, you must slow down enough to see what truly drives you. Most never get there. They feel a surge of anger and assume someone else is its cause. They feel the sting of shame and believe they are deserving of it. They feel the hum of anxiety and conclude there is something to fear. But each of these feelings begins with a belief, and if the belief is flawed, the emotion is a misguiding compass. There is no clarity in this loop, only repetition. The same arguments, the same breakdowns, the same regrets. And still, people call it life. If you do not know the root of your reactions, how can you ever claim your choices are your own? Consider how many decisions you've made simply to avoid discomfort. How many things you've agreed to out of guilt. How often you've stayed silent, not from agreement, but because your body recoiled at the thought of disapproval. That is not choice. That is survival, dressed in the polite robes of civility. Over time, this habit calcifies into a personality. You are not calm. You have simply perfected the art of suppressing the fire. You are not indecisive. You have merely learned to mistake discomfort for danger. So, what does real thinking look like? It looks like tension. It feels like resistance, like slowing down when everything around you is speeding up. It is uncomfortable because clarity demands confrontation. You must face yourself in the mirror, not the socially acceptable version, but the one still carrying old wounds, old fears, old programming. You must become brutally honest about your own internal mechanisms. Why do certain people trigger you? Why do you avoid certain conversations? Why do you repeat the same cycles, even when you know better? Clarity forms when you stop blaming the world for your reactions and start questioning their source, not in a self-punishing way, but in a self-liberating one. The moment you realize your reaction is not the final word, but merely the starting point, you begin to take back control. You cease to be a puppet of your own conditioning. You stop giving away your power in every conversation, every argument, every decision. You stop letting feelings make choices for you. You begin to hold a space between stimulus and response, and in that space, your mind becomes your own again. But clarity does not scream. It whispers. It asks you to observe without rushing to a conclusion. It invites you to sit with discomfort long enough to see what it is made of. It shows you that the mind is not a battleground of emotions to be conquered, but a terrain to be understood. This is the Stoic path, not to eliminate feelings, but to see them clearly, to strip away the illusion that your first impulse is always right, because most of the time, it is not. Your first impulse is the loudest, but rarely the wisest. True thinking asks you to wait, to step back, to watch how your body tenses, your breath shortens, your thoughts race, and then, only then, to respond with intent, not reflex. This is not easy work. It is hard to tell yourself the truth when your life has been built around avoiding it. But every time you choose awareness over autopilot, you build something unshakable within you. You stop being the person who needs the world to change in order to find peace. You become the person who carries clarity through chaos. And that kind of clarity is not just a mindset. It is a form of power. Quiet, unassuming, but immovable. So the next time you feel the urge to react, to defend, to withdraw, to lash out, pause. Just for a moment. Ask yourself, is this mine or is it inherited? Is this truth or just a habit? That single moment of stillness could be the difference between repeating your past and creating your future. And that, more than anything, is what Stoic clarity offers. The power to respond, not just react. To choose, not just comply. To think, not just feel. And when you can do that consistently, your life ceases to be a collection of reactions and becomes a map you are consciously drawing. Thinking clearly is not just about making better choices. It's about becoming someone who does not need to be rescued from their own mind. And in a world full of noise, that is the rarest kind of freedom. Watch closely, and you'll see it. You feel something, a pull, a spark, a rush of urgency. Maybe it's attraction, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's excitement dressed as destiny. But whatever it is, it hits you first, fast and loud. And without realizing it, your mind begins scrambling to make it all make sense. You don't begin with reason, you begin with emotion, and reason comes limping in afterward, desperately trying to justify the choice your body has already made. It feels right, you tell yourself. It must mean something. But what if that feeling wasn't wisdom? What if it was just familiarity? And what if that familiarity was rooted in your oldest wounds? There is a strange comfort in what we already know, even if what we know is pain. You might find yourself drawn to people who remind you of your past, not because it's love, but because it's recognizable. You might feel an urgency around an opportunity, not because it's right, but because you're terrified of missing out. You think you're being intuitive, but you're actually being pulled by fear. And when fear leads, logic does not resist. It cooperates. It puts on a mask and tells you a story. A beautiful, compelling story designed not to guide you, but to protect you from feeling the fear underneath. It happens in relationships. You feel seen by someone and call it connection, but perhaps it's just relief that someone finally notices you, and so you cling, not because it's healthy, but because you've been starving. It happens in your career. You get an offer and your stomach tightens, not because it's aligned, but because it feels scarce, and you convince yourself it's your big break, when really it's your big panic. If you look back honestly, most of your worst decisions came not from a lack of logic, but from a fierce loyalty to a feeling you never paused to question. That is the danger of unexamined emotion. It drives the car while logic merely decorates the dashboard. You think you're in control, but you're really just narrating what your inner world has already decided. And this isn't a flaw. It's how the mind tries to survive. Emotion is ancient, fast, instinctive, protective. But when you build your life around its impulses, you become reactive instead of intentional. Most people live at the mercy of their emotional weather. They believe if something feels intense, it must be important. If it hurts, it must be true. If it excites them, it must be a sign. But clarity doesn't work that way. Clarity doesn't follow emotion. It holds it still. It lets it speak, but it does not let it lead. When you think clearly, you become aware of the difference between what you want and what you're addicted to, between what feels familiar and what is actually good for you. And that awareness changes everything. You stop rushing to justify every emotional spike. You stop calling every pull a calling. You start recognizing that your brain, especially when it's trying to avoid pain, cannot always be trusted to tell you the truth in the moment. You slow down. You wait for the feeling to settle. You ask yourself, if I wasn't feeling this, what would I know? And sometimes the answer is painful. You might see that what you thought was love was just a need for validation, that what you called ambition was just comparison, that what you felt as urgency was just your fear, trying to outrun itself. This doesn't mean you become cold. It means you become free. Free to feel without being ruled by feeling. Free to notice emotion without immediately obeying it. Because emotion is not the enemy, it's information. It's just not the whole story. Like a spark, it can light a fire or burn down your house. The difference is whether you act before you think, before you pause, before you check in with what you truly value. Clarity asks for that pause. It creates space between the feeling and the follow-through. And in that space, you get to choose who you are. You might still feel afraid, but you won't let fear drive the decision. You might still feel drawn to something, but you will ask what you are truly being drawn to. You will start to recognize the difference between desire and desperation, between intuition and impulse. And that awareness will feel like a loss, because it is. You are losing the illusion that feelings are facts. You are letting go of the story that says, if I feel it, it must be true. That loss is the beginning of wisdom. People will tell you to trust your gut, and sometimes your gut knows. But sometimes your gut is just your past in disguise. Sometimes it is anxiety pretending to be wisdom. That's why you need more than feeling. You need philosophy. You need stillness. You need an internal structure. Without it, every strong emotion becomes a storm you cannot navigate. But with it, you become someone who can feel deeply and still decide wisely. That is the essence of Stoic clarity. Not to suppress emotion, but to observe it without rushing to obey it. The Stoics didn't deny feeling. They refused to be ruled by it. They practiced the pause. They trained themselves to separate the sensation from the story, so that when it was time to act, their decisions were grounded not in panic or pressure, but in purpose. This is the kind of clarity you build, not in a moment, but over time. By noticing the pattern, by catching yourself mid-justification, by asking gently, is this true, or is this just familiar? And the more you ask, the more power you gain. Not the kind of power that dominates others, but the kind that anchors you, the kind that lets you move through chaos without being hijacked by every emotional wave. The kind that sees clearly, even when the feeling is loud, because you have learned something most people never do. Emotions are real, but they are not always reliable. And until you can feel them without obeying them, you will always be dancing to someone else's rhythm. But when you stop dancing, when you pause, feel, and then choose, you become untouchable. You are no longer living in reaction. You are moving with quiet clarity, not because it feels good, but because it is right. And that difference, though invisible, is what transforms a reactive life into a deliberate one. Most people think they are being careful when they wait. They believe the longer they hold off on a decision, the more clarity they will gain. They don't realize that what they are truly waiting for is certainty, a kind of perfection that doesn't exist outside their imagination. You can hear it in their words, "I just need a little more time," or, "Once I'm sure, I'll make the move." But beneath those phrases isn't wisdom. It's fear. And fear, wearing the mask of logic, convinces you that hesitation is safety, that the unknown is always a threat, that until you can see every possible outcome, you are not ready. But that isn't clarity. It's a strategy to avoid commitment, a way to delay the discomfort of responsibility while feeling as though you are doing something wise. The truth is, no one is ever completely ready, not for the big decisions, not for the hard conversations, not for the moments that demand our growth. Readiness, in the way most people imagine it, is a myth. It's a mental loophole. You think you are buying time, but you are really trading your momentum for an illusion. And the longer you wait, the more your mind fills the void with fear. You imagine the worst. You play out every scenario that could go wrong. And soon, you are no longer standing still. You are stuck, caught in a cycle of overthinking and underliving. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." The Stoics knew the mind can be its own tormentor, that the pain we predict is often far worse than the pain we will ever experience. But the addict of certainty does not know this yet. They think if they wait long enough, the perfect moment will arrive. The path will clear. The fear will vanish. But it doesn't, because clarity does not come before action. It is born from it. You don't get clear and then move. You move, and the fog begins to lift. This is what separates the Stoic mindset from the rest. It is not recklessness. It is a respect for time. It is the understanding that movement itself sharpens thought. When you engage with life, when you step into discomfort, when you make the call or take the risk, you don't become less clear. You become more aware. You learn what works and what doesn't. You feel where the resistance lies and where it is just fear in disguise. And that feedback, real feedback, not imagined outcomes, is where clarity begins. But that requires courage. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that shows up without applause. The kind that says, "Even if I don't know everything, I know enough to begin." That shift in posture is what turns someone from a passive observer into an active participant in their own life. Because when you demand certainty before acting, you are not protecting yourself. You are holding yourself hostage. You are turning your own potential into a problem to be solved instead of a path to be walked. The need for certainty kills momentum. It takes every spark of desire, every whisper of intuition, and buries it under analysis. You start to question your own instinct. You doubt your timing. You seek external confirmation, hoping someone will give you permission to leap. But no one ever will, not fully, because the clarity you seek isn't in someone else's approval. It is in your own movement. It is in the decision to act, knowing you might be wrong, but choosing to live anyway. That is not recklessness. That is responsibility. And that is where real strength is built. Not in the perfect decision, but in the willingness to bear the weight of your choice. To say, this is mine, I chose it, and I will face what comes. That kind of ownership doesn't come from waiting. It comes from stepping in, fully present, fully aware that while outcomes are uncertain, your intent is clean. This is what Stoicism teaches. Not to wait for the world to make sense, but to act in a way that brings your own sense to the world. You do not need to know how it ends to begin. You do not need a map to take the first step. And you certainly do not need to silence all fear before moving forward. You just need to be honest about what is truly holding you back. Is it wisdom, or is it avoidance? Is it reflection, or is it delay? Most of the time, the longer you wait for clarity, the harder it becomes to act. The decision grows in your mind like a shadow, and shadows feed on time. The more you feed them, the darker they get. But when you move, when you decide, even without full certainty, you take away their power. You interrupt the pattern. You stop giving energy to a question that was never meant to be solved in theory, but to be lived in practice. And that shift changes everything. Because you begin to trust yourself, not because you know all the answers, but because you are no longer afraid of being wrong. That is what makes your mind stronger. Not perfection, but movement. Not guarantees, but growth. And even if you fail, even if the decision leads to pain, it was still the right move. Why? Because you acted from alignment, not from fear. And from that action, you learned something you could not have learned any other way. Something alive, something earned, something real. And that reality, no matter how imperfect, will always be more useful than the fantasy of certainty. Clarity, in the end, is not a feeling. It is a posture, a way of standing in your life that says, I will not wait to be ready. I am ready now. The path forward is found not in preparation, but in motion. It is not a matter of being right, but of being willing. Willing to show up, to try, to adjust, to learn. That willingness is the foundation of all that is meaningful. For the person who needs every answer before they begin will never begin at all. But the one who walks forward anyway, quietly, imperfectly, boldly, builds a life that is not only clear, but deeply lived. We live in an age of information, yet most of it leaves us more confused than empowered. There is no shortage of opinions, explanations, strategies, and stories. Scroll long enough, and you will find 1,000 ways to live, to heal, to win, to love, to let go, and then begin all over again. It feels like wisdom, but it rarely changes anything. You listen to a podcast as you drive, swipe through advice during lunch, and drown in the noise of other people's thinking. By day's end, your head is saturated, but your path remains shrouded. For clarity was never a measure of how much you know. It is the art of knowing what to ignore. The truth is, most information isn't there to help you. It is there to keep you watching, scrolling, wanting more. It preys upon your curiosity, your insecurity, your need to feel that you are doing something simply by learning something. But consumption is not clarity. In fact, if you are not careful, it becomes the very thing that blinds you. It dulls your instincts. You stop trusting your own voice because it is buried beneath 100 other voices that sound more confident, more polished, more certain. And slowly, without intent, you surrender your inner compass to guides who have never walked your terrain. Clarity is not forged in a storm of opinions. It is built in silence, in the space between thoughts, where your own insights finally have room to rise. But we are taught to fear that silence. We fill it with noise, afraid that if we stop taking things in, we will fall behind. But fall behind whom? Behind what? The pursuit of constant input is often a disguised fear of decision-making. You keep gathering information because you are afraid to act on what you already know. So you tell yourself you need more, another voice, another viewpoint, another reason to delay. But if the information does not change your next action, it is just noise. And noise does not feel dangerous until it becomes normal, until the constant hum of distraction is so familiar that real thinking feels uncomfortable. You sit alone, and your hand reaches for a device without a thought. You feel uncertain, and you open a new tab in search of an answer. You feel pain, and instead of facing it, you search for a label to place upon it, not to understand it, but to escape it. This is not learning. It is avoidance wearing a sophisticated mask. Carl Jung warned that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And endless information is one of the easiest voids to fall into because it feels productive. You can convince yourself you are working on yourself when, in truth, you are just looping, collecting philosophies like trophies, but never letting them transform you. Because transformation does not come from exposure, it comes from integration. And integration requires space, stillness, and honesty. Not with the world, but with yourself. You must begin to filter ruthlessly. Not everything deserves a place in your mind. Not every voice should be granted access to your inner world. You need boundaries, not just in your relationships, but in your consumption. You would not let a stranger walk into your home and rearrange the furniture. Why then do you let random content rearrange your priorities, your beliefs, your very emotional state? The most dangerous influence in your life is not always the loudest. Sometimes it is the quiet creep of unexamined input, the video you did not question, the post that subtly shifted your perspective, the conversation that planted a seed of doubt without you even noticing. This is where discipline becomes more powerful than intelligence. It is easy to collect insights. It is hard to decide what deserves your attention. The Stoics understood this long before the digital age. They spoke of guarding the mind like a fortress, not just from attack, but from clutter. Because clutter leads to confusion, and confusion, over time, leads to erosion. You do not lose yourself all at once. You lose yourself in pieces, one unchecked influence at a time, one distraction that becomes a habit, one piece of advice that sounds wise but leads you away from what you already knew to be true. So, start asking different questions, not, is this interesting? But, does this help me move? Not, is this popular? But, does this sharpen my next decision? Does this align with what I value? And if the answer is no, let it go. Not everything deserves your curiosity. Some things are loud only because they want your energy, but clarity is quiet. It waits for those who are willing to tune out the chaos and return to themselves. This is not about being closed-minded. It is about being intentional. Open-mindedness does not mean letting everything in. It means being open to truth and ruthless with everything else. You cannot think clearly if your mind is pulled in 10 directions. You cannot know your next step if every voice outside is screaming a different path. You cannot hear your own intuition if it is drowned in content. True growth happens not in the rush to consume, but in the discipline to discern. In the courage to say, I have heard enough. Now it is time to listen to myself. That is not arrogance. It is maturity. It is the trust that you do not need 100 opinions to make a single, meaningful decision. You need presence. You need focus. You need space. Because clarity is not the result of information overload. It is what emerges when the noise fades, when the world goes quiet enough for your own wisdom to be heard. And if you wish to live a life that reflects your values, your truth, and your power, you must protect that space as if it is sacred. Because it is. It is the foundation of every decision that shapes who you become. While clarity may feel like an internal battle, its foundation is often external. You can journal your thoughts, seek out wisdom, and even meditate in silence. But if your environment is chaotic, your mind will reflect that chaos. We imagine a divide between the world outside, our desk, our phone, our physical space, and the world within, our thoughts, our moods, our decisions. But there is no divide. The environment you keep is the container for your mind, and if that container is filled with noise, mess, and distraction, it becomes nearly impossible to access a quiet thought. Look around you, not casually, but with intention. Are there papers everywhere? Tabs open you have not touched in days? Half-formed ideas scattered across notebooks? This is not mere disorganization. It is mental friction. Each item is a tug. Each notification a leak. Each reminder of an unfinished task pulls a little of your energy without permission. Over time, this adds up. You do not even realize how much you are spending just to mentally push away the clutter. This is why so many feel drained before they even begin. It is not that they are lazy. It is that their space is designed to exhaust them. And in the midst of this, they try to make important decisions. They try to think clearly about their future, their purpose, their relationships. But the brain does not perform at its best in chaos. You would not plan a battle strategy in a nightclub. You would not write your will during an earthquake. Yet, we try to build our lives with quiet deliberation while surrounded by digital storms and scattered thoughts. It does not work, not because we are incapable of clarity, but because clarity cannot breathe in that environment. A Stoic protects their state. This does not mean you need absolute silence or a minimalist home. It means you take responsibility for the atmosphere that surrounds your thoughts. You guard it as you would guard your time or your energy. You begin to notice what you allow into your field. The lights constantly flickering, the conversations you overhear, the energy that occupies your space without your consent. Clarity does not need perfection, but it needs intention. When your environment is clean, not just in appearance but in energy, your thoughts stop rushing. You begin to feel the difference between what matters and what is simply urgent. A kind of presence returns, a stillness that is not empty, but aligned. It is the feeling of being in a space that supports your highest self, not one that fights against it. Carl Jung observed that, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." But the truth few acknowledge is that one cannot properly look inside when the outside world is pulling at their sleeves. The inner world needs peace to open, and peace requires preparation. Not in grand gestures, but in small, deliberate acts. Making your bed is not just a chore, it is a signal of order. Closing unused tabs is not just tidiness, it is clarity made visible. Turning your phone face down is not just manners, it is an act of self-respect. These small rituals are not about being neat, they are about removing the obstacles between you and your deepest thoughts. Most people underestimate how deeply space affects the psyche. They believe mental discipline alone will carry them. But when the eyes see clutter, the brain prepares for stress. When the ears hear constant pings, the nervous system reacts as if under attack. You start the day already agitated, not because of a crisis, but because your system is overloaded with meaningless signals. The brain can only track so much, and if it is tracking noise, it cannot track depth. This is why clarity so often arrives after you have cleaned a room, taken a walk, or simply turned everything off. It is not magic. It is space. It is giving your thoughts room to echo and your intuitions room to rise. We are not built to be stimulated all day. We are not built to make sense of our lives in between dings and fragments of other people's thoughts. Clarity is not found in more. It is found in less. Less distraction, less clutter, less noise, so that what remains can be felt fully. This is also about boundaries, not just physical, but energetic. Who are you letting into your space? What conversations are happening around you that leave you scattered? Your environment is not just objects. It is people, voices, patterns. You are not weak for needing boundaries. You are wise for recognizing what dims your inner light. A clean environment is an act of self-honesty. It is a declaration that you are ready to create the conditions for your best self to emerge. Start small. Clean one corner. Turn off one notification. Cancel one unnecessary obligation. These little shifts create momentum. They send a message to your subconscious. I am serious about this. And your mind will respond. It will begin to settle, to sharpen, to listen. The Stoics believed the mind should not be ruled by circumstance, but they also knew it must be trained. That discipline begins where your body is. Not later, not when everything is perfect, but right now, in the space you inhabit. Make it sacred, not through ritual, but through respect. Respect for your mind, for your peace, for your clarity. Because clarity is not something you stumble upon. It is something you prepare for. It enters the room only when there is space for it to sit. If you do not create that space, it will not shout over the clutter. It will simply leave. And here we arrive at the heart of the matter. Most people do not know what they are optimizing for. They think they do. They use words like peace, freedom, love, meaning. But if you observe their actions, the story is different. They profess a desire for peace, yet cling to the chaos of draining relationships and agitated routines. They claim to seek freedom, yet chase the approval that cages them in the opinions of others. They yearn for wholeness, yet build their lives from fragments, status, followers, attention, noise. They do not realize it, but their decisions have already answered the question they never took the time to ask. What am I really optimizing for? Because whether you are aware of it or not, you are always optimizing for something. Every choice is a vote cast in the direction of what truly matters to you. Not what you say matters, but what actually governs your actions. Your outcomes do not contradict your values. They expose them. You think you are unlucky, or distracted, or stuck. But most of the time, you are simply aligned with a priority you never meant to empower. Maybe it is comfort. Maybe it is recognition. Maybe it is the illusion of control. You loop through the same situations not because you are cursed, but because you are subconsciously loyal to a version of yourself that was built to survive, not to thrive. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is what happens when you do not define your aim. Life begins to aim for you, and it usually aims low, for quick highs, easy wins, and familiar traps. The systems around you reward indecision. They flood you with distractions so you never feel the need to sit with your own direction. You are nudged and guided, but never told to clarify the compass that should be driving it all. And so you are pulled instead of choosing. You end up chasing opportunities that sound good but feel wrong. You achieve things that impress people you do not even respect. You build momentum in a direction that leaves you feeling more lost, not less. This is the point where most people collapse, not from weakness, but because clarity demands an honesty that can feel brutal. When you say you want peace, but choose environments that reward emotional chaos, something must give. When you say you want love, but choose a validation that feels more like performance than connection, you eventually run out of excuses. That tension is not failure. It is feedback. It is your deeper self reminding you that the map you are following does not lead to where you want to go. Clarity does not demand perfection. It demands specificity. What do you actually want your life to move toward, not just in moments of reflection, but in everyday action? Is it freedom? Then why are your habits wrapped in dependency? Is it strength? Then why are your boundaries built to please? Is it truth? Then why do you silence yourself to keep the peace? These are not accusations. They are invitations. An honest life begins when you stop pretending the surface and the center are the same. It is not enough to want something. You must protect it. You must name it clearly and let it guide the hard choices. This is what it means to define what you are optimizing for. You accept the trade-offs. You accept that you cannot serve everything at once. You cannot prioritize both comfort and growth. You cannot chase both acceptance and authenticity without being torn apart. You must choose. That choice will cost you something, but it is the cost that makes it powerful. When your aim becomes singular, your mind begins to clear itself. The unnecessary falls away. You stop negotiating with every new opinion. You stop trying to be good at everything. You start designing your life around an inner signal, not the external noise. And with that, the quality of your decisions changes. You no longer ask, "What do I feel like doing?" You ask, "Does this move me toward what I truly want to embody?" That question breaks patterns. It grounds you when distractions sparkle. It clarifies your values when everything around you seeks to blur them. And clarity, once it takes root, makes your life simpler. Not easier, but simpler. Hard days will still come. Difficult people will still exist. But you will no longer lose yourself in them. For even when the path is shrouded, the destination is not. You know what you are walking toward, and that knowledge gives you an internal coherence the world cannot take. The Stoics optimized for virtue, for inner strength, for a life of integrity. They chose to live by a compass they had tested. You need that same clarity, especially now, when the world sells you 1,000 goals that look like success but feel like emptiness. Defining your aim is how you resist being pulled into lives that do not belong to you. It is how you make peace with what must be left behind, not because it is wrong, but because it is not aligned. And alignment is more valuable than abundance. It is not about having everything. It is about moving with focus, depth, and honesty. So pause and ask yourself, not abstractly but practically, what are you really optimizing for? When you speak, when you choose, when you commit, what sits beneath it all? If the answer is unclear, do not panic. Just listen. Clarity does not shout. It waits. It emerges slowly as you peel away the noise. But once it arrives, you will feel it. You will recognize the quiet conviction it brings. You will stop trying to be everything and start becoming something, not all at once, but steadily, in a way that lasts. There is a quiet danger in indecision. It does not announce itself as fear. It disguises itself as flexibility. It wears the mask of patience, of wisdom, of being open. You have heard the advice, stay open. Keep your options alive. But an open door through which everything may pass is not a sanctuary. It is a corridor, and a life spent waiting for the right option is a life spent in the hallway, never daring to enter a room and live. We are told, don't rush into anything. In certain moments, this is wisdom. But whispered too often, applied too broadly, it ceases to be caution and becomes a strategy for avoidance. To not choose feels like a sanctuary, a way to postpone the sting of regret. But let us be clear. Indecision is not wisdom. It is fear, speaking in a softer voice. You tell yourself you are simply taking your time, but in the quiet of your heart, you are hoping life will decide for you. You wait for a perfect sign, for some external force to make the uncomfortable choice you are afraid to make within. But life is not a passive current. It rewards movement, not hesitation, direction, not aimless drifting. The person who hesitates for too long begins to confuse stillness with safety. But this kind of drifting is not peace. It is erosion. Bit by bit, your confidence wears away. You begin to second-guess even the smallest things. Over time, you become someone who simply waits for clarity, for confirmation, for a certainty that never comes, and you forget what it means to act from your very core. Clarity is not found in floating. It is forged in the act of choosing, in making a decision and meeting what follows with courage. A decisive mistake will teach you more than endless speculation ever could. But we avoid that mistake, don't we? Because being wrong feels like failure. It wounds the ego. It makes you question your own judgment. And yet, indecision carries a cost of its own. A quieter, longer-lasting kind. The kind where days pass into weeks and nothing changes. The kind where years go by and you are still wondering, still weighing, still waiting. That is not caution. That is avoidance, wrapped in the language of reason. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "A wrongdoer is often the man who has left something undone, not always he who has done something." This is a powerful reversal. We are so terrified of doing the wrong thing, yet we rarely fear the crushing weight of what we failed to do. The words we never said, the chances we never took, the ideas we allowed to die before they were ever born. And what is worse is that these losses do not scream. They don't shatter our lives like a bad decision might. They fade quietly into the background, until one day you realize your life isn't built on your choices. It is built on your omissions, on a landscape of things that never happened because you told yourself it wasn't the right time. And we justify it with such noble phrases. I'm being wise. I'm just not sure yet. But if you dig deeper, you will almost always find fear. Fear of being judged, fear of closing a door, fear of failure, but also a profound fear of identity shifting. Because the moment you choose, you define yourself. You leave a part of your old self behind, and that finality terrifies us. So we delay. We say yes and no at the same time. We live in the middle, half-hearted, half-present, half-alive. But you do not grow there. You grow at the edge, where a decision demands you be seen, where you commit to something even knowing it might not work. That is where your clarity sharpens, not before the choice, but after it. Movement creates contrast. It reveals the terrain. You take a step forward, and the fog begins to lift. And even if it turns out to be the wrong path, at least now you know. You are no longer wondering. You are learning. You are adapting. You are becoming someone who moves. This movement doesn't have to be loud or bold. It doesn't have to change your entire life overnight. But it does have to be yours. Chosen, owned, and clear. Because the more you practice choosing, the stronger your discernment becomes. You stop needing everyone else's opinion. You stop waiting to feel ready. You begin to trust that clarity isn't a destination you arrive at. It is a result of walking with intent. Carl Jung believed that indecision often springs from a split within the psyche, a conflict between two opposing desires or fears, the part of you that wants to be seen and the part that wants to stay safe, the part that longs for transformation and the part that clings to the comfort of who you have always been. This internal tension isn't a flaw. It is the essence of being human. But if you do not resolve it through conscious choice, it will quietly rule you from the shadows. You will keep whispering maybe when your soul is screaming for a yes or a no. So do not glorify indecision. Do not mistake delay for depth. Real depth comes from showing up with your full weight, from saying, I don't know how this ends, but I choose this path anyway, and then allowing whatever follows to shape you. That is how strength is built, not by knowing the future, but by being willing to meet it on your own terms. And yes, you might make mistakes. You might change your mind. That is all part of the process. But indecision is never neutral. It costs energy. It drains your focus. It keeps your attention divided. You cannot be fully present on your current path if your mind is still negotiating another. A decision creates closure, and closure creates peace. Not always comfort, but peace, a kind of internal stillness that says, this is the way I am going. And it is in that stillness that real clarity lives. So if you have been floating, it is time to come back to the ground. Choose, not recklessly, but bravely. Listen to your resistance, but do not let it decide for you. Hear your fear, but do not let it write the script. Define your values, check your direction, and then move. Because waiting for the perfect moment is the most seductive trap of all. It makes you feel that you are being wise, when in truth, you are simply being delayed. Let your clarity come from motion. Let your confidence come from action. And let your strength come not from never doubting, but from no longer needing to avoid doubt in order to make a move. That is how decisive people are built, not from being certain, but from being willing. And the more willing you become, the less power fear has to keep you still. We often fail to see the subtle trade we make every day, choosing the path of ease over the path of meaning. This is not for a lack of depth or vision, but because the world constantly presents us with options designed to distract. Paths are presented, offers are made, people show interest. And because something is available, because it is right there in front of us, we assume it must be worth pursuing. But we must learn this crucial lesson. Availability is not alignment. Just because a thing is within reach does not mean it is right for your hands. Just because a person wants you does not mean they are good for your soul. Just because a door swings open does not mean you are meant to walk through it. We chase what is easy to access, what is immediately rewarding, what saves us from the discomfort of sitting in uncertainty. But in doing so, we lose our ability to wait, to pause, to truly discern. We forget how to choose deliberately. And slowly, our lives become filled not with what was true, but with what was merely convenient. You end up in relationships that were easy to fall into, but hard to grow in. You take jobs that pay just enough to keep you busy, but not enough to make you feel alive. You fill your calendar with obligations you never consciously chose, all because they were offered, not because they were aligned with your purpose. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But that privilege is lost the moment you start building your identity on what is available, rather than what is authentic. When your direction is dictated by what happens to be nearby, you become a passive character in your own story. You adapt to other people's timelines, other people's expectations, other people's definitions of success. And worse, you start to believe that this is what you wanted all along. You stop questioning if the life you are living is actually yours. A Stoic does not operate this way. A Stoic is not seduced by convenience, urgency, or flattery. They choose what is necessary, not what is shiny, not what is praised, but what is aligned with the kind of character they are trying to build. They know that the things that matter most often arrive slowly. They require patience, commitment, and clarity. And if your mind is constantly reacting to what is placed in front of you, you will never have the presence to see what actually belongs to you. This is where self-discipline becomes a form of self-respect. When you no longer say yes just because something is easy, when you no longer pursue something simply because it is possible, you begin to filter life through a different lens. You ask, does this fit the direction I am choosing? Does this reflect the values I claim to hold? And more often than not, the answer will be no. That is not a failure. That is growth. Growth often looks like not moving, like holding your ground when everything around you is trying to pull you somewhere else. Learning to say no is one of the most powerful skills you can cultivate, not in a defensive way, but in a grounded one. No to the wrong relationship. No to the tempting shortcut. No to the quick fix that would only distract you from the deeper work. Because every yes comes at a cost, and if you don't track that cost, you will spend your time and energy on things that feel full in the moment, but leave you empty in the end. The point is not to reject everything. It is to become someone who does not confuse availability with destiny. The more aligned you become, the more you will be misunderstood by those who still chase everything that shines. That is all right. You are not here to gather what everyone else wants. You are here to build what only you can carry. And sometimes that means slowing down. It means watching opportunities pass by without grasping. It means letting go of good enough so that you are not too full to receive what is truly yours. Clarity thrives in the space where patience lives, but our world is allergic to stillness. We are told that if we are not chasing something, we are falling behind, that if we are not constantly reaching, we are wasting time. But reaching is not the same as progressing. You can be busy your whole life and still end up nowhere meaningful. Movement does not always mean momentum. Sometimes the most powerful move is no move at all. Stillness is not stagnation, it is restraint. It is the refusal to let life drag you by the wrist. It is the decision to let your inner standard, not external supply, decide your direction. And that kind of stillness requires immense strength. It requires you to sit with discomfort instead of rushing to fix it, to trust that alignment is worth waiting for, to believe that the right things will find you when you have created enough space for them to land. That is the shift, from grabbing at what's there to choosing what fits, from being pulled by availability to being led by integrity, from reacting to every offer to responding only to what calls to something deeper in you. And the more you live this way, the more natural it becomes. You stop seeking so much and start seeing more. You begin to notice that many of the things you chased never truly nourished you, that the opportunities you feared missing were often just distractions in disguise. And eventually, something beautiful happens. You stop needing life to constantly impress you. You stop needing to be entertained or validated. You begin to enjoy the quiet. You start to trust your own pace. You learn to wait, not with anxiety, but with calm awareness. Because now, you are not waiting for something to fill a void. You are waiting because you know your aim is clear. You are not empty. You are ready. And there is a world of difference. The Stoic way is not about denial. It is about discipline, about choosing not what is in front of you, but what is in line with you. And that means letting go of what is merely available so you can make room for what is truly aligned. This isn't a once-in-a-while decision. It is a daily practice, a habit of saying, just because I can doesn't mean I should. It is a commitment to yourself that you will not sell your peace for proximity, that you will not trade your true path for whatever happens to show up uninvited. You are not here to chase everything. You are here to choose wisely. And choosing wisely often starts with the courage to do nothing when nothing fits, because that space you protect becomes the foundation of a life you actually want to live, not a life made of whatever was nearby, but a life made of what was true. And in that truth, clarity finally begins to take root, quiet, strong, and unshakable. True clarity is not merely the act of making a better choice. It is the wisdom to understand the very landscape in which that choice unfolds. It moves beyond the simple question of, "What should I do?" to the far more potent inquiry, "What system am I operating within? What game is being played here? And who benefits if I act without thinking?" When you are caught in the vortex of reaction, the world feels intensely personal. An insult ignites your pride. A sudden change seizes you with panic. But if you could step back, even for a moment, you would see the hidden machinery at work. Your reaction is often the very outcome someone else has engineered. This is where power becomes subtle, wielded not through force, but through framing. If someone cannot control your actions directly, they will seek to control the context in which you act. They don't need to tell you what to do. They just need to shape the moment so that you make their desired move for them. They need you to be impulsive. They need you to be defensive. They need you to take the bait, because once you do, your clarity dissolves and your power is handed over, not because you weren't smart enough, but because the frame had already been set before you even entered the scene. Carl Jung observed that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. This includes projecting their own chaos onto you, perhaps not consciously, but energetically. People frame situations to pull you into their mess, their pace, their urgency. If you are not careful, their lack of clarity becomes your responsibility. Their fear becomes your confusion. Their manipulation becomes your mistake. And it all began because you did not stop to ask, "Whose frame am I operating inside right now?" You see it everywhere, in arguments, when someone tries to define the terms before you even speak. In business, when you are pressured into a decision before an artificial deadline expires. In relationships, when silence is weaponized and timing is used to shift power. These are not just dynamics. They are frames, invisible structures that dictate how you think, feel, and respond, unless you take a deliberate pause to recognize them. Because until you see the frame, you are not thinking inside your own mind. You are thinking inside someone else's design. But the moment you see the frame, you interrupt the manipulation. You step outside of it. And instead of reacting, you observe. You ask not just, "What am I being told?" but, "Why am I being told this in this way? And what do they gain if I believe it?" That is the power of meta-awareness. It grants you the space to choose without being pushed. And from that space, you reclaim authorship of your own narrative. This is not about becoming paranoid or mistrustful. It is about becoming strategic. It is understanding that the loudest voices often come not from truth, but from a desire for leverage. People will pressure you to act quickly, to prove something, to defend yourself. But urgency is often a tool, not a truth. It is designed to rob you of clarity by hijacking your nervous system. That is why one of the clearest moves you can make is not an action, but a pause. A moment where you mentally step outside the frame and examine it before you move. Because when you rush, you rarely act from alignment. You act from pressure. And pressure is rarely neutral. Someone always benefits from it. The question is it you? If the answer is no, then it is not a situation demanding action. It is a trap demanding awareness. This one shift in thinking changes everything. You no longer ask, "What is the right answer?" You ask, On whose terms am I trying to answer this? And sometimes, the most powerful decision you can make is to refuse the question altogether, to change the rules, to reset the frame before you respond. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly. He would remind himself that the opinions of others were merely noise, external shadows that could not touch his inner reason unless he allowed them to. That inner fortress, that clear mental ground, is where clarity is built, not just by thinking hard, but by thinking differently, by zooming out from the immediate stimulus and remembering the long game. Who do I want to be in this moment, and who benefits if I forget? And sometimes, the frame is not set by another person. It is set by your past, your conditioning, your fear of being misunderstood or rejected. Those old scripts will whisper to you at the exact moment you need clarity. They will say, "Prove them wrong, say something now, don't lose your chance." And if you don't question them, you will act them out, not because they are true, but because they have been rehearsed in your nervous system for years. This is why clarity is not just an intellectual exercise. It is a practice of mental freedom. It is the ability to interrupt your own autopilot, to challenge the frame not just outside you, but within you. To say, just because this feels urgent does not mean it is. Just because this looks familiar does not mean it is right. This kind of self-command does not make you cold. It makes you calm. It does not make you indecisive. It makes you deliberate. And over time, it gives you a quiet edge. Because while others are scrambling to respond, to defend, to prove, you are watching the board. You are moving from clarity, not from panic. In a world addicted to reaction, that kind of poise becomes both rare and powerfully effective. The strongest minds are not just the ones with the best answers. They are the ones who can slow down long enough to question the question itself. They understand that every situation comes with invisible strings attached, and that sometimes clarity means not cutting the string, but seeing who is holding it. So, before you speak, before you act, before you decide, take that extra breath. Ask not just, "What do I want?" but, "What is being set up here? Who wins if I rush? And what happens if I refuse to take the bait?" Because that moment of awareness is where your freedom lives, not in avoiding all conflict, but in refusing to be played. Clarity is the art of seeing beyond the surface, of holding your center when the world tries to shake it. And it is not about winning every situation. It is about not losing yourself in them. That is the real frame worth protecting. The frame of a mind that thinks before it moves, that watches before it speaks, that knows when silence is power and when action is freedom. Not because it is smarter, but because it is sovereign. And in that sovereignty, clarity becomes your default, not your exception. Most people hesitate before a big decision because they are afraid of making the wrong move. They picture the embarrassment, the loss, the chaos that might follow. And so they wait. They stall. We tell ourselves, "I just need a little more time." But while we're so busy evaluating the risk of action, we almost never stop to calculate the crushing price of inaction. What is the true cost of doing nothing? What begins to decay in the silence? What opportunity fades from view while you hesitate, convincing yourself it's wisdom when it is really fear in disguise? The mind has a strange bias. It exaggerates the weight of stepping forward while completely downplaying the toll of standing still. You might spend days, weeks, even months analyzing every possible move. But rarely do we turn that same intensity inward and ask, what happens if I keep avoiding this? What if nothing changes, not just for today, but for years? And if that question doesn't chill you, perhaps it should. Because time doesn't wait while we hesitate. It keeps moving. And often the greatest damage in life isn't caused by the things we do, but by the things we let slide, by the silence we justify, by the potential we bury while pretending it will dig itself out later. This is where the Stoics had it right. They didn't obsess over worst-case scenarios for the sake of anxiety. They practiced something deeper. Premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, not to catastrophize but to prepare. To run simulations in the mind, not of what success looks like, but of what decay looks like if you ignore what must be done. It's not about pessimism, it's about honesty. To look clearly at the truth of what happens when you let fear set the pace of your life, when you let indecision rot away the very structure of who you are becoming. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." He wasn't talking about mere distractions. He was pointing to something far more dangerous, wasting time through mental passivity, through waiting for life to sort itself out. But life doesn't hand you clarity like a gift. It reveals itself only through forward motion. The longer you sit in pause, the more your confidence corrodes, not because you're incapable, but because clarity is tied to momentum. Every day you avoid the decision, it becomes heavier, not lighter. We imagine that avoiding the hard conversation will keep the peace, that ignoring the gut feeling will somehow buy us time. But peace bought through avoidance is rented, not owned. Sooner or later, the payment comes due, often in the form of regret, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet, daily erosion of knowing you didn't move when you should have. As Carl Jung said, what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. That avoidance doesn't freeze the problem, it feeds it. Silence becomes the soil in which your doubts grow roots. And while your higher self waits at the threshold, life moves on without it, not as a punishment, but as a consequence. You don't need to rush into everything. The point is to learn to simulate not just the danger of movement, but the far greater danger of staying still. To ask yourself honestly, what decays when I delay? And what kind of person am I becoming by doing nothing at all? Sometimes clarity isn't a breakthrough, it's a reckoning. It's realizing your avoidance was never neutral. It was actively shaping your life in the background. The weight you thought you were avoiding was just shifting to another part of your soul, one that eventually begins to whisper in moments of stillness, "You know what you should have done." But once you see that, you gain power. You can begin to choose your discomfort wisely. The discomfort of the hard conversation, or the discomfort of silence. The discomfort of risk, or the discomfort of watching time erase your potential. The sharpest minds don't just think about what could go right. They calculate the corrosion of avoidance. Because clarity, in its real form, is often the result of action, not the prerequisite. So don't just ask, "What will happen if I do this?" Also ask, "What will happen if I don't?" Let that second question ring loud in your decisions. And remember that stillness can be a weapon when chosen, but it is a prison when defaulted to. We grow up collecting ideas like pebbles. To be kind, to forgive, to not put yourself first. And eventually, those beliefs become background noise, so constant and familiar that we forget to ask a simple, devastating question. Where did they come from? So much of what we call our values aren't truly ours. They're borrowed, inherited, rewarded into us. You act a certain way and someone claps. You question something and someone frowns. Slowly, silently, you adapt, not to truth, but to approval. What you end up with isn't conviction. It's conditioning. Not a compass, but a leash. And now, every decision you make gets filtered through a belief you never questioned. Be kind, they say. But kind to whom, and at what cost. Always forgive, but does that include those who never acknowledged their trespass? Don't be selfish. But what if the only way to grow is to finally put yourself first? This is why the Stoics focused on inner auditing. Epictetus said, "Don't just say you have read books. Show that through them you have learned to think differently." In other words, don't just inherit beliefs, dissect them, interrogate their origin. Jung warned that most of our so-called morality is absorbed from the collective, and once it's inside you, it speaks in your own voice. That's what makes it so dangerous. The idea that doesn't serve you still feels like your own thought. It's a parasite dressed as wisdom. Clarity begins the moment you ask, who benefits from me believing this? Who benefits if I never speak up? Who benefits if I constantly suppress my needs? Often the answer isn't noble, it's strategic. Someone, somewhere, profits from your confusion, from your guilt, from your silence. Clarity arrives when you realize that even noble-sounding beliefs can be twisted into tools of control. Be humble can mean stay small. Forgive can become tolerate abuse. You're not rebelling by questioning these ideas. You're returning to yourself. You stop being the echo of your environment and start becoming the architect of your mind. You choose your values the way a craftsman chooses tools, not because they were handed down, but because they are sharp, honest, and necessary. And when you do that, you start to speak clearer, stand taller, and say no without shame, because your life is no longer built on borrowed slogans. It's rooted in examined truth. We live in a world where thinking is often mistaken for doing. We fill journals with goals, listen to podcasts on self-mastery, and analyze every emotion, trying to solve life like an equation. Yet, despite all this mental gymnastics, nothing changes. We still hesitate, still doubt, still feel stuck. Why? Because clarity without action is just another form of delusion. The overthinker wears clarity like a costume. They believe understanding the path is the same as walking it. But thinking happens in comfort. Action demands discomfort. It asks you to be exposed, to risk failure, to confront resistance. You can convince yourself you're progressing just because your thoughts sound smarter, but until your feet move, your life doesn't. There comes a point when reflection becomes a rehearsal for avoidance. You don't need another mental model. You need movement. As Jung said, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. There's a profound gap between the self you imagine and the self you live as. And what's stopping most of us isn't confusion. It's fear wearing the mask of analysis. It's perfectionism disguised as preparation. But clarity doesn't guarantee a perfect outcome. In truth, it is stagnation that erodes you, not movement. You can course correct once you're in motion, but you can't correct a path you never started. Sometimes the most powerful act of clarity is a single step into the unknown. A step that breaks the pattern and shifts you from passive observer to active participant. You stop being a critic of your possibilities and start being a builder of them. The belief that a little more thought will finally make you fearless is a lie. The only thing that makes fear lose its power is motion. Clarity that leads nowhere is just another way to stay safe, to stay comfortable, to stay small. Don't let your wisdom rot in the dark. Bring it to life, even if it trembles. The fog clears when you walk through it, not when you wait for it to disappear. A thinker can explain the path, but only a doer can walk it. And only a walker becomes free. Pain has a way of showing up right when we think we've figured things out. It interrupts, embarrasses, and strips us of control. And in that raw discomfort, most of us reach for anything to escape. But real clarity is not born from avoiding pain. It is forged by integrating it, by looking it dead in the eye and asking, "What are you trying to teach me?" Most people survive their pain without ever studying it. They move on quickly, hoping the next chapter won't sting as badly. But a wound unexamined is a lesson repeated. Pain that isn't understood doesn't go away. It just hides, seeping into your decisions and shaping your future without your awareness. There is a quiet power in turning toward what hurt you, not to wallow, but to study it like data. Rejection becomes information, not identity. It might reveal a pattern, a deeper wound, or simply remind you that your worth was never meant to be outsourced in the first place. The same is true for failure. When studied without ego, failure is one of life's greatest clarifiers. It strips away illusions. It shows you what doesn't work, yes, but it also shows you what you're made of. It reveals where your foundations are weak, so you can rebuild them stronger. It is not a verdict on your worth, but a guidepost for your growth, pointing the way toward a clarity that can only be earned. It forces you to confront assumptions you never knew you had. This is why the Stoics didn't run from suffering. They embraced it. They turned it into fuel. They saw mistakes not as signs of weakness, but as essential steps toward mastery. Our modern world teaches us to project an image of constant victory, to curate a life that looks perfect. But real clarity isn't born from performance. It's born from reflection. It isn't about how flawless you appear on the surface. It's about how honest you are with what is broken underneath. And here is the paradox. The more you face your pain directly, the less power it holds over you. The wound that once brought you shame becomes a symbol of your strength. The silence that once held your secrets begins to speak with wisdom. You don't need to broadcast your pain to the world. You simply need to stop hiding it from yourself. To integrate pain isn't to romanticize it. It is to use it. It is to recognize that your past wounds don't disqualify you from growth. They are part of the reason you are able to grow at all. A scar is not a weakness. It is evidence of healing. It is proof that you survived. But surviving isn't enough. You must understand what you survived and why. This is where emotional maturity begins. Not in pretending you've never been hurt, but in no longer being owned by that hurt. You can acknowledge betrayal without becoming bitter. You can feel disappointment without giving up. You can carry your pain without infecting others with it. That is strength, not the absence of emotion, but the integration of it. Seneca once said, "Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body." He meant it. When you stop treating pain as a detour and begin to see it as part of the path itself, everything changes. You stop being afraid of discomfort. You stop flinching every time life challenges your illusions. Instead, you start listening, watching, learning. Pain will always knock on your door. You cannot live a full life without it. But you get to decide the role it plays. Will it control you from the shadows? Or will it become something sacred? A burden you have earned the right to carry with grace? Clarity deepens every time you extract a principle from your past. When you ask, "What did that experience reveal about me?" Not just what happened, but how you reacted, what it triggered, what it exposed. The past is a mirror, not a cage, but only if you dare to look into it without flinching. And when you do, when you stop trying to erase your wounds and instead begin to build with them, something powerful happens. You become less reactive, less desperate for validation, less afraid of endings, because you have already met pain and learned to speak its language. You have turned it from an intruder into a teacher. In doing so, you have become something solid, someone who bends but does not break. There is a quiet dignity in someone who has faced pain and stayed soft, someone who has been disappointed but has not closed off, someone who carries memories that still sting but refuses to let them poison the present. That is the work. Not pretending pain doesn't exist, but weaving it into the fabric of who you are, not burying it beneath who you are trying to be. This isn't easy. It takes time. It takes silence. It takes a kind of honesty that can make your chest tighten. But it is worth it. Because when you do this inner excavation, when you pull those old wounds into the light, you finally stop being controlled by them. You don't need to keep proving you're strong. You simply are. So the next time life knocks you off balance, pause. Don't just try to survive the moment. Study it. Ask what it's revealing about your expectations, your identity, your attachments. Use it. Because that is what a Stoic does. They don't avoid the fire. They walk through it and emerge clearer, quieter, and far more powerful in their calm. In the end, the strongest people are not those who have avoided pain. They are the ones who have made peace with it, who have stitched it into their philosophy, who have let it deepen their understanding rather than narrow their heart. And that is a kind of clarity that can never be taken from you, because it wasn't built in comfort. It was forged in the very places most people run from. Most people react to life as if it's happening in fast forward. They move from one event to the next, one decision to the next, barely pausing to examine the context or the consequences. Everything becomes immediate. Everything feels urgent. But clarity doesn't live in urgency. It lives in depth. It lives in the ability to pause, take a breath, and ask not just what's happening now, but what lies beneath it, behind it, and beyond it. Clear thinking isn't about seeing more, it's about seeing through. When something happens, an insult, a failure, an opportunity, most people stop at the surface. They react to the moment as if it's all that exists. But beneath that moment, there are layers. There is the emotional layer, how it feels. There is the social layer, how others might see it. There is the strategic layer, what it means for tomorrow, next week, or next year. And then there is the moral layer, how it aligns or conflicts with your values. To think with layered vision is the discipline of noticing all of it before you act. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." That is layered vision. It's seeing a rude comment, not merely as disrespect, but as a reflection of someone else's struggle, or a mirror for your own sensitivity. This isn't overthinking. It's depth thinking. It is the refusal to let the obvious blind you to the subtle. Most people only ever see the obvious. We scroll through headlines and form opinions. We hear someone's tone and assume their intent. We receive a message and immediately jump to a conclusion. But the world is rarely so simple. The clearest thinkers are rarely the loudest or the fastest. They are the ones who have trained themselves to sit with complexity, to digest before they decide, to resist the magnetic pull of quick certainty. They are the ones who ask, "What am I not seeing here?" Slowing down is an act of rebellion in a world addicted to speed. And yet, slowing down is the only way to truly see. To think clearly, you must zoom out. You have to ask how this single moment fits into a larger pattern. You have to recognize that every decision you make echoes. That silence today might protect your peace next week. That walking away now might create space for something better later. That restraint in this moment might earn you deeper respect in the long run. People often mistake quickness for intelligence, but it is depth that changes the game. Depth is what allows you to say, "I understand this situation," not just react to it. It gives you foresight. It gives you options. It gives you a power that isn't loud or flashy, but stable. And that kind of power cannot be taken easily because it was not built on impulse. Layered vision means training your mind to see consequences before they arrive. It means thinking not just about what someone did, but why they did it. Not just what an opportunity looks like now, but what it might become under pressure. Not just what you feel, but what created that feeling. And then asking if the reaction you're about to offer is in alignment with the person you are becoming. This kind of thinking takes practice. At first, it can feel unnatural, like overanalyzing, but over time, it becomes second nature. You start to ask different questions. You stop being pulled into emotional traps. You notice patterns in people and situations more quickly. You learn to anticipate, to sense, to interpret, and most importantly, you learn to hold a space between stimulus and response. That is where clarity lives. In that pause. When you think with layered vision, your actions become intentional. You stop falling into old loops. You don't just do what feels good, you do what's right. You don't just say what's easiest, you say what's necessary. You don't just pursue what's available, you pursue what's aligned. And suddenly, life starts to feel less chaotic, not because it's easier, but because you are no longer ruled by the immediate. Imagine someone insults you in public. A surface thinker reacts instantly, with anger, defense, retaliation. But a layered thinker slows down. They see the insecurity behind the insult. They see the people watching. They see the long-term cost of an emotional reaction. They see that silence might earn them more respect than any clever comeback ever could. And so, they choose differently. Not because they are passive, but because they are aware of the deeper game. This isn't about being robotic. It's not about removing emotion from your decisions. It's about letting your emotions inform your actions, not control them. Emotions are valuable intelligence, but they are first drafts. A layered thinker edits before they publish. They don't ignore their gut reactions. They examine them. They ask, where is this coming from? What else is true here? What is the wisest move, not just the most satisfying one? Thinking with depth doesn't mean you'll always make the perfect choice, but it means your choices will be rooted, considered, and authentic. And that consistency is rare. In a world driven by reaction, the person who moves with calm clarity becomes magnetic. They are trusted and respected, not because they talk the most, but because when they speak, they have already listened. When they act, they have already thought. Layered vision is about becoming harder to manipulate. When you see through the surface, the bait doesn't work. You don't rise to every provocation. You don't chase every shiny opportunity. You don't panic when plans shift. You adjust. You recalibrate. You keep your vision intact. That is clarity, not the absence of challenge, but the refusal to be distorted by it. In the end, thinking clearly isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about knowing how to think, when to pause, what to question, and what to trust. And trust must be earned, especially when it comes to your own impulses. Don't just trust your first thought, interrogate it. Don't just accept what's obvious, question it. Don't just react, reflect. This world will keep pulling you towards speed, noise, and urgency. It will tempt you to respond quickly, decide hastily, and move without thinking. But you can resist. You can pause. You can see. And in that seeing, you reclaim something rare, your depth. Your ability to move through life with vision, not just motion. And that clarity changes everything. Most people walk through life with their minds wide open, not in the enlightened sense, but in a vulnerable, unguarded way. Every voice is allowed in. Every comment gets a reaction. Every passing opinion becomes a weight on the scale. And before they realize it, they are no longer thinking for themselves. Their mind has become public property, an open hallway for every passing belief, fear, and trend. But the kind of clarity that anchors you, that steadies you, doesn't come from exposure. It comes from ownership. To own your mind is not to shut it down. It is not to block everything out and hide in isolation. It is to be discerning, selective, and intentional. It means declaring, "This mind is mine. It is not for sale. It is not up for auction to the loudest influencer, the angriest comment, or the latest trend." And that kind of clarity is not passive. It is earned. It is enforced. It is lived. Because the world will try, every single day, to lease space in your head. And it is your job to decide what gets in, and what should have never been allowed near the gate. You can feel it when your mind no longer belongs to you. You become restless, reactive, easily swayed. Your opinions shift with the algorithm. Your self-worth gets tied to feedback loops. Your direction bends to whoever shouts the most convincing story. Suddenly, you're not living. You're being lived. You're not thinking. You're being thought through. This erosion of self doesn't arrive with fireworks. It's quiet and subtle. It feels like compromise, like being open-minded, until one day you can no longer hear your own voice above the noise. Clarity is a line in the sand, a boundary, a sacred refusal. It says, "No one gets to tell me who I am unless I agree." This doesn't mean you stop listening. It doesn't mean you ignore wisdom. But it means you do not absorb everything blindly. You don't let someone else's urgency become your timeline. You don't let their judgment become your truth. You listen like a gatekeeper. You observe like a strategist. You decide with your own hands on the wheel. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." He was right, because full ownership means taking responsibility for what your mind becomes. No more blaming others for your confusion. No more pointing fingers at the culture, the critics, or the noise. When your mind is yours, your clarity is yours too. And that is a weight most people choose to avoid. It's easier to follow, easier to outsource. But clarity is not about ease. It's about strength. And strength has a cost. A mind that isn't owned is always chasing approval, status, or distraction. It is always running, but never arriving. But when your mind belongs to you, something shifts. You stop flinching. You stop over-explaining. You stop rushing to justify your every move. You move cleanly, deliberately. And with that steadiness, the world doesn't pull you off course. It watches you find your own. That kind of movement doesn't just influence people, it inspires them, because most have forgotten what it looks like to move from the inside out. You don't need everyone to understand you. You don't need the world to clap for you. You just need to be clear, clear about your direction, clear about your values, clear about which thoughts belong in your inner sanctuary, and which ones will never make it past the gate. This isn't stubbornness, it's sovereignty. And in a world that profits from confusion, mental sovereignty is rebellion. It is saying, "I will not be another echo. I will not be another puppet for agendas I don't even understand. I will live by design, not by default." When you begin to live like this, distractions lose their grip. Manipulators lose their leverage. Approval stops tasting like oxygen. You are no longer performing. You are present. You are no longer guessing. You are grounded. Even in chaos, you can return to your center because you have built one. Even in doubt, you can trust yourself because you have earned it. Not through perfection, but through the quiet practice of returning to your truth again and again, no matter how loud the world gets. Owning your mind also means learning to sit with silence. Not the silence of disinterest, but the silence of strength. The ability to pause without panicking, to observe without reacting, to think without immediately announcing. That stillness is where clarity sharpens, where identity takes root, where conviction forms. You do not owe the world your thoughts every time it demands them. Sometimes the clearest mind is the quietest one in the room. When you guard your mental space, you stop treating every opinion like an emergency. Not every criticism needs a defense. Not every invitation needs a yes. Not every battle is yours to fight. Owning your mind is knowing when to engage and when to walk away, when to speak and when to stay silent, when to wait and when to move with force. And that discernment, that is where clarity breathes. Not in reacting to everything, but in responding to what truly matters. You will still make mistakes. You will still be wrong sometimes. But at least they will be your mistakes, your lessons, your growth. There is a dignity in that, a deep peace in knowing that even when things don't work out, you did not betray yourself in the process. You did not sell your attention to the highest bidder. You did not move from fear or impulse or manipulation. You moved because you were clear. And if that clarity leads to pain, it also leads to freedom, and eventually, to wisdom. The clearest thinkers aren't those with the most information. They are those with the strongest filters, the ones who have stopped letting everyone else narrate their life. The ones who have realized that confusion isn't just a lack of answers, it's an overload of noise. And once they cut through that noise, what remains isn't just silence, it is power. Clean, quiet, unshakable power. The kind that moves differently. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. So start drawing the line. Start listening for your own voice underneath the world's expectations. Start asking, is this thought mine? Is this fear borrowed? Is this goal even real? You will be surprised how many of your beliefs were never yours to begin with. How many of your doubts were planted by people who never wanted you to think for yourself. But the moment you reclaim your mind, you become dangerous in the best possible way. Not aggressive, not reactive, but centered, independent, and clear. And clarity, once truly owned, doesn't ask for the world to follow. It simply walks its own path and watches who keeps up. You were never meant to be a prisoner of noise. Your mind was built to be a sanctuary. Guard it like your life depends on it, because it does.